Banished from the stars, humanity built a civilization that amazed the galaxy part. 5. The engineer exchange program changed everything. What started as a desperate request from the Ashen Dominion became a flood of interest from across the galaxy. Within 5 years of the first visit, 12 different species had sent teams to study human civilization. Drellmoth stayed in the Sol system for 2 full years. He lived in a habitat in the asteroid belt, worked alongside human engineers, and learned to think differently about everything. The first lesson was the hardest: abundance through limits. His people had always believed that having more space and more resources meant better life. Humans proved the opposite was true. By accepting that they had fixed limits, they stopped wasting and started optimizing. Every system was designed to work forever, not just until the next planet was colonized. The recycling systems amazed him most. On his homeworld, water was used once and cleaned enough to dump back into rivers. Here, water was recycled dozens of times, with each cycle removing more impurities until the water was purer than any natural source. The system had been running for 70 years without requiring any new water input. Food production was equally impressive. Drellmoth watched as nutrients from human waste were processed, purified, and fed to plants growing under artificial lights. Those plants produced food, oxygen, and more biomass. The biomass became nutrients again. The cycle was perfect and endless. He asked a young engineer named Park Salmon how they designed such perfect systems. She laughed and said, "They are not perfect. We improve them constantly. But we learned that small improvements over long time periods create amazing results. We had 90 years to get good at this." Drellmoth sent weekly reports back to the Ashen Dominion. His directors began implementing human techniques immediately. Recycling programs were expanded. Waste reduction became a priority. Efficiency specialists were trained using human educational materials that were shared freely. The results were dramatic. Within 3 years, the Dominion reduced their resource consumption by 40% while maintaining the same quality of life. The crisis that had threatened their civilization was solved not by finding new resources, but by using existing resources better. Other species noticed. If the proud Ashen Dominion was learning from humanity, perhaps there was something worth learning. Delegations arrived from the Sylvian Concordat, the Methane Collective, the Crystal Singers, and dozens more. Some came out of curiosity. Others came out of desperation. All of them left changed. A philosopher from the Sylvian Concordat named Thrennik spent a year interviewing humans about their culture. She wanted to understand not just the technology, but the thinking behind it. Her book, The Gift of the Closed Door, became a galactic bestseller. In it, she explained how human psychology had shifted. Before the exile, humans had been expansionist because they could be. After the exile, they became perfectionist because they had to be. The limitation had not destroyed them. It had focused them. Park Hyun was 105 years old when he received an invitation to address the Galactic Council. He was too old to travel, but he agreed to send a recorded message. Shin Yuna traveled to Consensus Prime to deliver it in person. The council chamber was full. All 47 species sent representatives, just like at the trial 90 years earlier. But the atmosphere was completely different. This time they waited to hear what humanity had to say. Shin Yuna stood in the center of the chamber, the same spot where Park Hyun had stood during the trial. She played the recording. Park Hyun's elderly voice filled the massive space. 90 years ago you judged us as too aggressive, too expansionist, too dangerous. You were right. We were those things. We thought that civilization meant spreading across as many worlds as possible, using as many resources as we could reach. You stopped us from continuing down that path. He paused, and the council members leaned forward to hear better. You taught us that we could not expand outward, so we expanded inward. We expanded in complexity and efficiency and understanding. You gave us boundaries, and we turned those boundaries into foundations. The closed door became the greatest gift our species ever received. The recording continued. Park Hyun spoke about the culture of optimization, about how limitation bred innovation, about how humanity had learned that true advancement was not about controlling more space, but about perfecting the space you had. You meant to punish us, he said near the end, but you saved us. You forced us to become what we never would have become on our own. For that we thank you. The chamber was silent when the recording ended. Velthor, now incredibly ancient, rose slowly from his seat. His voice was weak but clear. We owe humanity an apology, he said. We judged them by our own failures. We assumed that confinement would lead to decline, because that is what would have happened to us. We did not understand that humanity would respond to limitation by becoming unlimited in creativity. The formal apology was unanimous. All 47 species voted to lift the quarantine immediately. Humanity was offered colony worlds, trade agreements, and a permanent seat on the council with full voting rights. Shin Yuna stood in the center of the chamber and delivered humanity's response. We accept your apology, and we appreciate the offer, but we must decline the colony worlds. We have learned something in our 90 years of isolation. Civilization is not measured by how much space you control. It is measured by the quality of life you provide and the sustainability of your systems. She smiled. The Sol system is our home. It is enough. It is more than enough. We have 22 billion people living in comfort, with room for billions more. We do not need other worlds. The council members looked confused. One asked, but surely you want freedom to travel? To explore? We do, Shin Yuna agreed. And we accept the freedom to travel. Our scientists and engineers will be happy to visit other systems, to share what we have learned, to help other civilizations optimize their own systems. But colonization? Expansion? Those are old dreams. We have new dreams now. She gestured at the holographic display showing the Sol system. Our dream is to make our home perfect, to achieve 100% efficiency, to create a civilization that can last not just for centuries but for millions of years. We are not there yet, but we are close. Why would we abandon that work to start over on some distant planet? The council did not understand at first, but over time, humanity's philosophy spread. It started with a few species trying human techniques to solve immediate crises, but the results were so good that others paid attention. Within 20 years, closed system philosophy had become the dominant framework for galactic civilization. Universities across the galaxy taught human engineering principles. Planets stopped being viewed as resources to exploit and started being treated as closed systems to optimize. Wars over resources decreased. Why fight over a planet when you could make your existing planets more efficient? Conflicts became cooperation. Species shared efficiency techniques instead of fighting over territory. The era of expansion gave way to the era of perfection. It was a quieter time, less dramatic than the age of colony ships and territorial disputes, but it was also more stable, more sustainable, and ultimately more prosperous. Humanity became teachers. Human engineers and philosophers traveled throughout the galaxy, helping other species redesign their civilizations. They taught the principles of closed system thinking. They shared their technical knowledge freely. They asked for nothing in return except the satisfaction of helping others avoid the crisis that would have destroyed them. In the Sol system, life continued to improve. Lee Minho, grandson of Choi Minho who had written The Closed Door, led the design team for humanity's newest project. The Dyson swarm would eventually capture a significant fraction of the sun's energy using billions of small satellites. The project would take centuries to complete. Lee Minho would not live to see it finished. But that did not bother him. He was building for a civilization that thought in terms of millennia, not decades. One evening, he stood in an observation dome on one of the habitats, looking out at the construction sites scattered throughout the system. Thousands of lights marked human activity from Mercury to Neptune. The solar system was alive with purpose. A young engineer named Kim Hana joined him. She was fresh from university, eager to work on the Dyson Swarm project. "Do you ever wonder what it would have been like if we had not been exiled?" she asked. "If we had been allowed to keep expanding?" Lee Minho considered the question. "We would have spread across 1,000 planets," he said finally. "We would have consumed their resources and moved on, always looking for the next world. We would have been rich in territory and poor in understanding." He gestured at the view. "This is better. We learned to be excellent instead of just big. We learned to think clearly instead of just moving fast. The exile made us wise." On Consensus Prime, a statue was unveiled in the council chamber. It depicted Park Hyun at the moment of humanity's exile, standing alone in the center of the chamber surrounded by the red lights of guilty verdicts. But he was not looking down in shame. He was looking up toward an unseen future. Banished from the stars, humanity built a civilization that amazed the galaxy part. For 90 years after humanity's exile, The Ashen Dominion faced a crisis that threatened to destroy their civilization. Their primary industrial world, Ashkara, was dying. The planet had been mined and exploited for 3,000 years. Now the resources were running out. Director Velthor was ancient by this point. He had been part of the council that banished humanity. And now he faced the consequences of his own civilization's wastefulness. The Dominion needed to relocate 6 billion citizens from Ashkara to new habitats. But building enough habitats would cost more resources than the Dominion had available. Other council species faced similar problems. The galaxy had been built on expansion and extraction. Species moved from planet to planet using resources until they ran out, then moving on. But space was filling up. Conflicts over resources were increasing. The old way of doing things was failing. A junior aide in Velthor's office made a suggestion that seemed insane. "What if we asked humanity for help?" she said quietly during a meeting. "Our sensors show they have built hundreds of habitats in their system." The other officials laughed. One said, "The species we imprisoned? They would never help us, and even if they wanted to, what could they possibly teach us?" But Velthor did not laugh. He was old enough to remember that humanity had been exiled not because they were weak, but because they were too aggressive in their expansion. Perhaps that energy had gone somewhere else. He ordered a detailed survey of the Sol system. Krathnoon received the authorization for a full scan with surprise. In his 40 years of monitoring humanity, no one had ever asked for more than basic reports. Now suddenly the council wanted detailed information about every structure, every energy signature, every material flow in the human solar system. He deployed a fleet of advanced sensor drones. They could not cross the quarantine boundary, but from the edge of the system they could detect almost everything. The data took 3 weeks to collect and another week to analyze. What the analysis revealed made Krathnoon check his instruments 3 times. The numbers could not be right. But every check confirmed the same impossible results. The Sol system contained 1,237 major habitats. Countless smaller stations and facilities filled the space between. The total population was estimated at 22 billion people, all living at a standard that matched or exceeded the wealthiest worlds in the galaxy. But that was not the shocking part. The energy output of human civilization was 6 times higher than council models said was sustainable for a single system. Material efficiency was operating at levels considered theoretically impossible. Waste heat, the inevitable byproduct of any industrial activity, was barely detectable. Somehow, humanity was recycling energy itself. The water recycling efficiency was 99.9%. Food production used 1/10 the resources of comparable galactic civilizations. Even air recycling was operating at levels that violated what Krathnoon thought were the laws of thermodynamics. Krathnoon sent his report to the council with a note. Recommend immediate attention. Human civilization has achieved sustainable closed system operation beyond known theoretical limits. The report reached Velthor's desk within hours. He read it 3 times, then called an emergency meeting of the senior council. The chamber was tense as he presented the findings. "We assumed that quarantine would limit them," Velthor said, his voice heavy with age and regret. "We thought that confinement would weaken them. We were wrong. Humanity has done what none of us have accomplished. They have built a perfect civilization." The word perfect caused an uproar. Council members shouted objections. Perfect was impossible. No civilization was perfect, but Velthor displayed the data, and one by one the voices fell silent. The numbers did not lie. Humanity had achieved what every species dreamed of: unlimited sustainability. They could maintain their civilization forever without expanding, without depleting resources, without generating waste. They had solved the fundamental problem that plagued every galactic civilization, and they had done it in 90 years. The council debated for days about what to do. Some wanted to ignore the findings. Others suggested offering trade agreements. A few radical members suggested that the galaxy should adopt human methods, though they did not know what those methods were. Finally, Velthor made the decision. The Galactic Council would send a formal communication to humanity, the first in 90 years. It would be carefully worded, diplomatic, and humble. They would ask if humanity would be willing to share technical information about habitat construction and resource management. The message was sent, and then they waited. On Mars, Kang Min-seo was the chief counselor of humanity. He was 60 years old, part of the generation born just after the exile. His parents had told him stories about the galaxy, about the trial, about the shame of banishment. Now he sat in the council chamber reading a message from the very people who had imprisoned his species. The message was polite, almost apologetic. The Galactic Council requested information about human habitat technology. They mentioned the Ashen Dominion's crisis. They offered payment in rare materials and cultural exchanges. They did not apologize for the exile. They did not ask to lift the quarantine. They just wanted to know how humans built so well. The Human Council debated for 3 days. The chamber was divided between old anger and new possibilities. Kim Tae, now 90 years old, gave an impassioned speech about how the galaxy had abandoned humanity when they needed help. Why should humans help them now? But Shin Yuna, a young counselor who had never known anything but the closed system, argued for engagement. "We learned to build because we had to," she said. "They are learning the same lesson now. We can show them a better way," she continued. "Revenge through bitterness gains us nothing. But showing them that we succeeded, that we thrived, that we became better than they ever imagined, that is the best revenge possible." The council voted. It was close, but Shin Yuna's view won. Humanity would respond. Kang Min-seo crafted the reply himself. It was brief and dignified. "The Galactic Council may send their engineers to observe our civilization. They will be allowed to study our methods and learn our techniques. We share this knowledge freely because we believe that all civilizations deserve the chance to build sustainably." The message ended with a sentence that made Velthor weep when he read it. "We hope that what we were forced to learn will help others choose to learn before crisis forces them." Within months, the first alien ships in 90 years approached the Sol system. The Sentinel platforms, which had stood guard for so long, received updated orders. They would allow specific vessels to enter for educational purposes. The first ship carried a team of Ashen engineers led by a specialist named Drellmoth. He was arrogant at first, certain that his 3 centuries of experience would show him simple tricks that humans had discovered by accident. That arrogance lasted exactly 1 day. As his ship approached the inner system, Drellmoth saw the density of construction and could not believe his sensors. The asteroid belt was not a belt anymore. It was a city that stretched for millions of kilometers, filled with habitats, factories, farms, and millions of other structures all working in perfect harmony. The Jupiter ring shone like a crown around the gas giant. Energy beamed outward in precise laser streams to receivers throughout the system. The system's total energy production was higher than the entire Ashen Dominion's output, and they controlled 50 star systems. When Drellmoth toured the first habitat, he stopped speaking for an hour. He just walked through the streets looking at everything, taking readings with his instruments, trying to understand what he was seeing. Everything was recycled. Everything was efficient. There was no waste at all. Zero. His report back to Velthor was not a technical document. It was closer to a religious experience. "They have done it," he wrote. "They have created paradise within a prison." Banished from the stars, humanity built a civilization that amazed the galaxy part. 320 years after the exile, humanity had stopped trying to contact the galaxy. There were no more broadcasts, no more messages asking to be forgiven, no more attempts to negotiate. The silence was intentional. Humans were too busy building to waste time talking to people who did not want to listen. Admiral Yoon Ji-won commanded the Inner System Defense fleet from a station near Mars. Her fleet consisted of 300 ships, all designed purely for defense. They patrolled the inner solar system, protecting the habitats and construction sites from accidents and the rare criminal group. The fleet had never fired a shot at an external enemy because no enemy had come. Training exercises happened every week. Yoon Ji-won believed that readiness was everything. Her crews practiced emergency responses, rescue operations, and defensive maneuvers. They were not preparing for war with the galaxy. The Sentinel platforms at the system's edge would destroy any human ship that tried to leave. But Yoon Ji-won believed that discipline and purpose kept people focused. The population had stabilized at 15 billion people. That number seemed impossible to the generation that had been exiled. But the new generation understood how it worked. Efficiency had become a way of life. Every person had a role. Every resource was used multiple times. The solar system was not crowded. It was optimized. Habitats filled the asteroid belt like a string of pearls. Over 400 cylinder habitats spun slowly in the darkness, each one home to millions. They were connected by transport ships that ran on schedules as reliable as clockwork. Travel between habitats was common and easy. The moons of Jupiter and Saturn hosted their own colonies. Europa's ice provided water for the system. Titan's thick atmosphere was being slowly processed into useful chemicals. Even tiny Enceladus with its geysers of water ice had become an important resource station. What outsiders would have found most surprising was the quality of life. People in the habitats lived well. They had parks, theaters, restaurants, and schools. Art flourished in the cylinder habitats where artists could work with the unique properties of rotation and artificial gravity. Musicians created performances that used the entire inner surface of a habitat as their stage. Far from Earth, at the very edge of the solar system, someone was watching. Junior observer Krath Noon of the Sivian Concordat sat in a small monitoring station, reviewing the automated reports. He had been posted here for 10 years, watching humanity's quarantine. It was considered the worst assignment in the Galactic Council's observation service. Nothing ever happened. Humanity stayed inside their boundary. The Sentinel platforms never activated. Every month, Krath Noon sent the same report to the Council. Quarantine holding. No violations detected. He did notice the construction activity. His sensors showed hundreds of structures being built in the asteroid belt and around the outer planets. Krath Noon noted this in his reports but classified it as expected behavior. The humans were trapped, so naturally they were building more space stations. It seemed like desperate activity, the thrashing of a confined species trying to make the best of a bad situation. The Council read his reports with minimal interest. One senior member commented that at least the humans were keeping themselves occupied. Better that they build space stations than try to break the quarantine. None of them understood what they were really seeing. 50 years after the exile, humanity completed Project Helix. The structure was built inside Mercury's orbit, closer to the Sun than any habitat had ever been placed. It was a massive rotating ring that captured sunlight directly and converted it to energy with nearly perfect efficiency. The engineering challenges had been enormous. Materials had to withstand intense heat and radiation. The rotation had to be precisely controlled. Cooling systems had to work flawlessly. But humanity had 50 years of practice building in extreme environments. They knew how to solve hard problems. Project Helix housed 2 billion people. It was not just a habitat, it was a statement. Humans could live anywhere in their solar system, if they were smart enough and worked hard enough. Kang Sora was the chief architect of Project Helix. She was 35 years old and had been born 3 years after the exile. She had never seen another star system. She had never met an alien. The galaxy beyond the Sentinel platforms was just a story to her, something her parents talked about with sadness. But Kang Sora did not feel sad. She felt proud. At the dedication ceremony for Project Helix, she stood before the crowd and cried. Not from sorrow, but from joy. Her generation had built something magnificent. They had taken the limitations placed on them and turned those limitations into inspiration. Project Helix was visible from Earth with the naked eye when the angle was right. It looked like a bright star that moved slowly across the sky near sunset. Children on Earth would point at it and dream of living there someday. To them, it represented what humans could accomplish. The culture of humanity had changed completely. The old desire for expansion had been replaced by a love of optimization. People did not dream of conquering new worlds. They dreamed of making their existing world better. Universities taught closed system engineering as the highest form of knowledge. The most respected scientists were those who could make systems more efficient. A researcher who found a way to reduce waste by even 1% was celebrated like a hero. Fashion reflected the culture. Clothing was made to last decades and be repaired easily. People took pride in wearing the same well-made jacket for 20 years. Planned obsolescence, the old practice of making products that broke quickly so people would buy more, was considered almost criminal. Food culture evolved too. Every habitat had extensive gardens where food was grown using recycled nutrients. Meat was produced in laboratories from cell cultures, using far fewer resources than raising animals. Chefs competed to create delicious meals from ingredients that previous generations would have thrown away. Entertainment became more collaborative and less consumptive. Instead of passive watching, people participated in community performances and art projects. Virtual reality allowed for incredible experiences without using physical resources. Entire worlds could be created in simulation, and people could explore them together. Education started from a young age with the principles of closed system living. Children learned to think about consequences and connections. They understood that everything they used came from somewhere and would go somewhere after they were done with it. This awareness became instinctive. By year 70 of the exile, humanity's solar system was the most densely populated and highly engineered system ever created. But from the outside, it still looked like a species making the best of their prison. Krathnoon, still at his monitoring post, updated his reports. He noted that construction activity remained high. The number of structures in the system had increased significantly. Energy output was higher than his models predicted. But he attributed this to humans working harder to maintain their quality of life in confinement. His reports were filed away in the Council's vast database, rarely read by anyone important. On Earth, the old generation was dying. Park Hyun was 90 years old, living in a comfortable apartment in Seoul. He sometimes spoke to students who wanted to hear about the trial and the exile. He told them about the day humanity was banished, about the 47 red lights on the voting display. The students always asked the same question: "Do you wish we could rejoin the galaxy?" Park Hyun's answer changed over the years. At first he said yes immediately, but as he grew older and saw what humanity had built, his answer became more thoughtful. "I wish we had been given a choice," he would say. "But I cannot deny what we have become. Perhaps we needed the closed door to discover what we could truly build." Banished from the stars, humanity built a civilization that amazed the galaxy part. 5 years had passed since the exile. Dr. Lee Nari floated in zero gravity, looking out at what would become the largest human habitat ever built. The structure spun slowly in the darkness of the asteroid belt, still incomplete but already impressive. When finished, it would house 5 million people in comfort. The habitat was a massive cylinder, 3 kilometers long and 1 kilometer wide. Rotation would create artificial gravity on the inner surface. People would live on the inside walls, looking up at their neighbors across the open center. Parks, buildings, and even small lakes would line the interior. From the outside, it looked like a giant metal tube covered in solar panels and docking ports. Lee Nari had designed most of it herself. Before the exile, she had been a junior engineer on a failed Mars expansion project. Now she was the head architect of humanity's survival plan. Exile had a strange way of creating opportunities. The idea was simple but revolutionary. Humans could not expand outward into the galaxy anymore, so they would expand throughout their own solar system. Every asteroid, every moon, every bit of empty space would be used. If they built smart and built well, the solar system could support far more humans than anyone thought possible. Construction crews worked around the clock. Robots did the dangerous jobs, but humans supervised everything. The materials came from the asteroids themselves. Mining ships would attach to a rocky asteroid, extract the metals and minerals, and process them right there in space. Nothing was wasted. Even the dust was collected and used. The first habitat section was completed 6 months later. 500 families moved in immediately. They were volunteers, brave people willing to test the new design. Lee Nari visited them often, asking questions, fixing problems, making improvements. The families reported that life inside felt normal, almost like living on Earth. Children played in the parks. Adults went to work. The artificial gravity felt real enough. Success led to more construction. Within 2 years, 3 more cylinder habitats were spinning in the asteroid belt. Plans were drawn up for dozens more. While Lee Nari built upward, others worked on efficiency. Engineer Choi Min-ho spent his days thinking about waste. Before the exile, humanity had been careless with resources. They threw things away. They used more than they needed. They assumed there would always be more materials available from new colonies. That thinking had to change. Choi Min-ho published a book called The Closed Door. It became the most important philosophical work of the generation. The main idea was simple. Humans now lived in a closed system. Nothing came in from outside. Nothing left. Therefore, everything had to be recycled, reused, and optimized. The book changed how humans thought about everything. Factories were redesigned to recycle all waste products. Water treatment became so efficient that not a single drop was lost. Even air was cleaned and reused dozens of times. Energy came from the sun, which would shine for billions of years. Cities started competing to see who could be most efficient. Awards were given to neighborhoods that produced zero waste. Children learned in school that waste was not just bad, it was shameful. A new culture emerged, focused on doing more with less. The changes went beyond just engineering. Art began celebrating density and connection. Music became more complex with many layered sounds woven together. Fashion favored clothing that could be worn multiple ways and lasted for years. The concept of disposable items almost disappeared. Universities restructured their entire curriculum. Engineering students now studied biology to understand how nature recycled everything. Artists took classes in mathematics to understand optimization. Everyone learned to think in terms of closed systems and maximum efficiency. Han Bora led one of the most ambitious projects. Venus, the second planet from the Sun, was a hellish world with crushing atmospheric pressure and temperatures hot enough to melt lead, but it also had resources humanity needed. Han Bora's team designed atmospheric processors that could be dropped into Venus's thick clouds. The processors would float on the dense atmosphere, using the heat and pressure to break down carbon dioxide into oxygen and carbon. The oxygen would be collected and shipped to other habitats. The carbon would be compressed into materials for construction. The project took 3 years just to test the first prototype. When it worked, Han Bora cried with relief. The team launched 200 processors over the next year. Venus would never be a comfortable place to live, but it became a valuable factory, producing materials and oxygen for the growing human civilization. Mars saw its own transformation. The red planet had always been important to humanity, but now it became crucial. Underground tunnels were dug connecting all the major settlements. The Valles network, as it was called, stretched for thousands of kilometers beneath the Martian surface. Trains moved through the tunnels at incredible speeds, making travel between cities quick and easy. The tunnels also served as protected spaces for farming. Martian soil was treated and enriched. Underground farms produced food using artificial lights powered by solar panels on the surface. Within a few years, Mars was producing more food than it consumed, sending the surplus to habitats throughout the system. But the true marvel was Jupiter. The massive gas giant became the industrial heart of humanity's new civilization. A team of thousands worked for 7 years to build an orbital ring around the entire planet. The ring was not solid, but made of hundreds of connected stations, all floating in formation around Jupiter's equator. The stations extracted hydrogen from Jupiter's atmosphere using long tubes that reached down into the clouds. The hydrogen-fueled fusion reactors that produced enormous amounts of energy. That energy was beamed to the rest of the solar system using laser transmission stations. Yoon Ji-won commanded the security fleet that protected the Jupiter ring during construction. Pirates and desperate groups sometimes tried to raid the construction sites for materials. Yoon Ji-won's ship stopped them without ever firing a lethal shot. She believed that humanity could not afford to fight among themselves anymore. Every conflict was waste. Every lost ship was materials that could not be replaced. The Jupiter ring was completed in year 8 of the exile. At the dedication ceremony, hundreds of thousands of people watched from their habitats across the solar system. The ring generated more power than all of human civilization had used before the exile. It was proof that humans could do incredible things when they worked together within their limits. Population growth slowed naturally. People still had children, but families were smaller. It was not because of laws or restrictions. It was because everyone understood the mathematics. The solar system could support many billions of people if everyone was careful. But if the population grew too fast, the careful balance would break. Young people grew up with a different mindset than their parents. They had never seen another star system. They did not dream of exploring distant planets. Their dreams were about building better habitats, creating more efficient systems, and solving the puzzles of their closed world. To them, the solar system was not a prison. It was the greatest engineering challenge ever given to humanity, and they were determined to win. Banished from the stars, humanity built a civilization that amazed the Galaxy Part 1 park. Hyun stood in the center of the grand chamber, surrounded by beings from every corner of the galaxy. The ceiling above him stretched so high that clouds formed near the top. Holographic displays floated everywhere, showing star maps and legal documents in hundreds of alien languages. He had been standing there for 6 hours listening to the charges against humanity. The chamber belonged to the Galactic Council, and today they would decide humanity's fate. 47 different species sent their representatives. Some looked almost human. Others were so strange that Park Hyun needed his translator implant just to understand how they communicated. A few didn't even have bodies in the traditional sense, existing as clouds of gas or patterns of light held together by force fields. The lead prosecutor, a tall creature with silver skin and 4 arms, read the final charge. Humanity had broken 16 different territorial agreements. They had expanded too fast, built colonies in disputed zones, and refused to slow down when warned. Other species took centuries to claim new worlds. Humans did it in decades. The galaxy, according to the prosecutor, could not tolerate such aggressive behavior. Park Hyun wanted to defend his species. He wanted to explain that humans were just excited to be part of the galactic community. They meant no harm. They simply loved to explore and build. But the rules of the council were clear. He could not speak unless directly questioned, and no one had asked him anything. The vote came quickly. One by one, each species cast their decision on the holographic display. Red lights appeared next to each name. Guilty, guilty, guilty. All 47 species agreed. Humanity was too dangerous to remain free in the galaxy. The council director, an ancient being named Velthor from the Ashen Dominion, announced the sentence. His voice echoed through the chamber like thunder. Humanity would be confined to their home solar system. All human colonies beyond Earth's sun would be evacuated within 1 year. The council would place automated defense stations at the edge of the solar system. Any human ship that tried to leave would be destroyed instantly without warning. Park Hyun felt his legs go weak. This was worse than he had imagined. It was not just a fine or a restriction on new colonies. It was complete exile. Humanity would be cut off from the galaxy entirely. The chamber emptied quickly after the verdict. Alien representatives left in small groups, talking quietly among themselves. None of them looked at Park Hyun as they passed. He stood alone in the massive space for a long time, staring at the holographic display that still showed the voting results. 47 red lights. Not a single species had voted to give humanity another chance. Kim Tae received the evacuation orders 3 days later. As captain of the transport ship Morning Sky, he was responsible for evacuating the colony on New Busan. The planet was beautiful, with purple oceans and 3 moons that created spectacular tides. Humans had lived there for 20 years. 3 million people called it home. The evacuation was chaos. People packed what they could carry and left everything else behind. Homes filled with furniture and memories would be abandoned. Schools, hospitals, and parks would be left empty. The colonists cried as they boarded the transport ships. Many had been born on New Busan. They had never seen Earth. Now they were being forced to leave the only home they knew. Kim Tae watched the loading process from the bridge of his ship. Each transport could carry 50,000 people, but the journey back to Earth would take months. The ships would be crowded and uncomfortable. Food would be rationed. People would sleep in shifts because there were not enough beds. A young girl, maybe 7 years old, pressed her face against the window as the ship lifted off. Kim Tae saw her watching New Busan shrink below them. The girl's mother held her close, both of them crying. That image would stay with Kim Tae for the rest of his life. The evacuation continued for 11 months. Every human colony was emptied. Mars Station, Europa Base, the mining facilities in the asteroid belt beyond human space, the research outpost near the beautiful nebula of 7 colors, all of it abandoned. Humanity retreated to their solar system like water flowing backward. The final ship crossed the boundary on the last day of the deadline. Kim Tae commanded that ship too. Behind them, massive alien structures appeared at the edge of the solar system. The Sentinel platforms were enormous, each one the size of a small moon. Their weapons tracked the human ship as it moved away, but they did not fire. Humanity had obeyed the order. Kim Tae broadcast a final message to the council. It was simple and brief. "We are complying with your sentence. We are going home." Then he shut down all long-range communication systems. There was nothing more to say to the galaxy. On Consensus Prime, the neutral world where the Galactic Council met, Director Velthor reviewed the reports. All human colonies had been evacuated. The Sentinel platforms were operational. The quarantine was complete. He marked the file as closed and moved on to other business. In a private meeting with other senior council members, Velthor expressed satisfaction with the outcome. Humanity, he explained, would now face a choice. They could reform their aggressive ways and learn patience, or they could decline slowly in their isolated system. Either way, the problem was solved. The galaxy was safer, the other council members agreed. Some expressed mild sympathy for humanity, but none suggested reconsidering the sentence. The meeting ended with a toast to galactic peace and stability. None of them thought about humanity again for many years. Why would they? The problem was solved. Humanity was locked away, contained, and no longer a threat. The council had more important matters to address. Back in the solar system, humanity faced their new reality. Earth was crowded with returning colonists. The moon bases expanded rapidly to handle the overflow. Mars, which had been a modest colony before, suddenly needed to house millions more people. Resources were tight. Space was limited. The future looked dark. Park Hyun returned to Earth and resigned from his diplomatic post. There was no need for ambassadors anymore. Humanity had no one to talk to. He spent his days walking along the beaches, staring up at the stars, remembering when humans could travel to them freely. Kim Tae took a position managing one of the expanded Mars colonies. Every day he looked up at the sky and wondered what they would do now. Humanity had always moved forward, always expanded, always reached for the next horizon. What happened to a species when they ran out of room to grow? The answer to that question would surprise everyone, including humanity itself.